Okay, so as promised, we're going to add a little bit more interactivity between P5 and the DOM this time around. So before we dig into it, I want to show you something that I did as part of my own capstone. I was doing a lesson plan on recursion and fractal geometry for grade school kids. And so I made this interactive where you can notice on the right-hand side of the screen here is a canvas element. It's a P5JS generated canvas. And on the left-hand side, it's just normal DOM. I've got, CSS applied to make the sliders, position and look okay and everything. But essentially, this is just an HTML input slider. And you can see that as I do stuff here where I can make, the tree grow or shrink, or I can change the value of this thing to, bring it on over, and it's getting computationally intensive now, so relax that a little bit. But you can tell that all this is happening with the DOM talking to the canvas, where I can this is a button that's just formatted with some fancy CSS, but it changes the entire algorithm of the sketch, right? So I'm saying I've got this recursive fractal thing going, but when I click a button, I'm saying, okay, calculate it completely differently and then draw something else. So all of that is possible. I will do a very primitive version of that now. So let's just quickly go over to the whiteboard. And what we're going to do is first I'll grab a highlighter pen. What color you guys like? Blue. Let's go with blue. All right. So this here is going to be an P5 canvas. Okay. And then I'm going to have 3 sliders that I'll create for red, green, and blue values. And depending on where we slide this thing, as we slide it, this way, we're going to add more red to the circle that we draw in our canvas, and so forth. We can slide back and forth in green and blue, and then we can add and remove color that way. So we're going to create an interactivity between our P5 sketch and stuff that's happening on our web page, and it's really not that hard. Okay, back to code. You shall see that I've done just a little something different with our HTML. I put in a little CSS actually. So all I'm doing is I am going to center align the body text so that the sliders that we create are going to be aligned to the center. And I am also doing the same with the canvas via margin 0 auto is just a little CSS trick to center or something. So that's just a little something different that I'm doing with the CSS, but it's nothing that you guys couldn't do yourselves. Okay, but into the meat of this particular video, we're gonna go through this line by line. Okay, I'm gonna create some variables that are gonna hold my elements, my red slider, my green slider, and my blue slider, and that's the actual HTML5 input element for slider. Okay, range element, I think is what it's called. And then I'm also going to create some variables to hold their values. So we're going to create a slider. Actually, might as well just go down the code here. You'll see that I'm going to create these 3 sliders, and they're going to have a value from 0 to 255, right? Because we want to take each of the red, green, and blue channels anywhere from 0 to 255. So I'm going to go and create a slider element, which again you can read all about in the P5 DOM reference area. But the way that the arguments are passed in for this particular function is it asks for the minimum, the maximum of our range, what the default range is to start out at, and what each tick on our slider is going to represent for an increment. So this will read as, I want my minimum value as 0, I want my maximum as 255, I want my starting value to be right in the middle at 128, and then each time I move 1 pixel over, or 1 notch over on my slider, I want it to change the range 1 unit. Okay, and I'm going to create 3 of those. On lines 12 through 14, I'm creating red slider, green slider, and blue slider. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to create 3 variables to hold the value of what our slider output is. All right, so I'm going to create 3 paragraphs, and I'm going to populate those paragraphs with HTML of the value of my red, green, and blue slider values. All right, you're going to see this when this comes together. All right, so you'll see over here in Draw, you'll see a fill function, and all I'm doing for fill is I'm taking the current value of our red, green, and blue sliders. So I'm getting red slider dot value, okay, which is a way that we can get the literal value from an input element, like that range element, that slider, another P5 DOM function. And I'm simply going to create that as my fill for the current draw frame in our draw loop. And I'm going to draw an ellipse in the middle of the screen. Width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and a 200 pixel circle. All right. Beneath that, I'm going to change the values each time through the loop. I'm going to be updating the values of our red, green, and blue paragraphs. And I'm going to do that with .html, just like I did in the first video with the mouse click. I'm going to say the red value is, and then I'm going to concatenate the red slider value in the green slider value and the blue slider value and show those in the web page. All right. So hopefully you can visualize what I drew on the whiteboard and now what's going to happen on our page. If I go over to, let's see, we're in week 8.3. Okay. So there you have it. I have 3 sliders. Again, everything is center aligned, so everything's sort of in the middle of the page. Remember, the default value for each one of those sliders is 128. So we've got a circle that's middle gray, 128. Right? Each value, red, green, and blue, are all 128. So let me go ahead and start changing the red value. All right. So you can see now it says red value is 255, and this is, you know, this is a DOM element right here. This is DOM stuff happening. I can change the green, and I can change the blue, and it's just like what I did with that fractal tree, except, you know, this is a little bit more primitive, but it's the same communication that's happening. So 1, 2, 3, red light, 1, 2, 3, green light. All right, you get it. That's interactivity between the DOM and Canvas in P5. Go back to the code and just make sure that I've got everything. You know, it's not too many lines of code. Hopefully this isn't too confusing. The only thing we're doing with our fill values, we're just grabbing values, you know, that represent numbers. So when we move that red slider all the way over to the right, it's going to get 255. If we move it all the way to the left, this fill is going to get value 0. That's all we're doing in a couple of HTML changes, just like we did before. So again, this does not require too much of an investment in the complexities of the P5 DOM library. This is just stuff that you can do right out of the gates.